Hello, everybody. Before we jump into drawing perspective, let's talk about the three basic types of perspective. First, I want to make sure you understand the difference between shapes and forms. Shapes are flat, two-dimensional objects, such as the square, the circle, and the triangle. They are flat objects with no depth. As you know, a square is a flat shape with 4 equal straight sides and 4 right angles. But most importantly, the square is the master or mother of all shapes, because all shapes can fit within a square. You could start drawing a circle and a triangle by first drawing a square and fitting them in it. That leads us to forms, which are three-dimensional shapes. The 5 basic forms are cube, cone, pyramid, sphere, and cylinder. The cube is a symmetrical, three-dimensional shape contained by 6 equal squares. It has 6 sides, all right angles, all parallel, all perpendicular, and the cube is the master or mother of all forms. And that means that all forms can fit perfectly in a cube. So if you can draw a cube, you can also draw a cone, a pyramid, a sphere, and a cylinder, because the cube is the master of all forms. We can then extend that idea that if you can visualize the world around you as cubes just stacked on top of each other, then you can easily draw anything in perspective. It's easy because humans like to construct our world out of squares and cubes. We like right angles. We like parallel lines. Look at the room you're in right now. You can reduce everything you see into those 5 basic forms. So that's why we always start perspective by talking about the cube. As I mentioned, there are 3 types of perspective, and that all comes down to the cube. The cube is comprised of 3 sets of parallel sides. We also better know these as the width, the length, and the height. All edges along the width of the cube are parallel to each other. I've made this cube transparent like a piece of glass so you can see all sides of it at once. All edges along the length of the cube are parallel to each other. And all edges along the height of the cube are parallel to each other. And here you can see them all together as the width, the length, and the height. So that means there are 3 types of perspective because there can be up to 3 sets of parallel receding lines in a cube. So, if you remember, when I said that all receding lines that are parallel to each other will converge at the same point. So, if you were to look at a cube straight on, so that the front face of the cube is facing you, then you will only be able to see 1 set of receding parallel lines. The length of the cube is receding away from us. If we were to extend those lines long enough, they would eventually converge at a vanishing point on the horizon. Notice that the width and the height of the cube are not receding. They are perfectly vertical and horizontal. They are parallel to us. 2-point perspective. Now what happens if you turn that cube so you're looking at it from an angle? The edge of the cube is now closest to you, and you can see 2 sets of receding parallel lines. The length of the cube is receding away from us towards the left, and now the width of the cube is receding away from us towards the right. If we were to extend these lines long enough, they would eventually converge on 2 separate vanishing points on the horizon. And notice that the height of the cube is not receding. The edges of the height of the cube are perfectly vertical. They are parallel to us. They will never converge. Now what happens if we put that cube on the floor? We are now looking down at the cube, and the tippity corner of that cube is what is closest to us. Now, all three sides of the cube are receding away from us. The length of the cube is receding away from us towards the left. The width of the cube is receding away from us towards the right. And now you can see that the lines of the height of the cube are no longer perfectly vertical. They are receding downwards, even if it's just the slightest amount. If we were to extend those lines from each side long enough, they would eventually converge on three separate vanishing points. Hence why we call it three-point perspective, because all three sets of parallel receding lines in the cube will converge at three separate vanishing points. So why do we have three different types of perspective? It all depends on where we are looking and how the objects are oriented to us. That's why we can't move and can't change our station point in the middle of the drawing. Changing where we are can change the perspective. 1 and 2 point perspective are the simplest, and they have one big thing in common. In 1 and 2 point perspective, your line of sight is always looking straight ahead. You are not looking up and down. You're looking straight ahead at the horizon line. So, if all else fails, the first question you ask yourself is, am I looking up or down or straight ahead? If you are looking straight ahead, then your drawing will always be in 1 or 2 point perspective. The difference between 1 and 2 point perspective has to do with how the object is oriented to you. If your cube is facing you, and the closest thing to you is that front face of the cube, then you will only see one set of receding lines, and then it is 1 point perspective. If you rotate that cube so that the closest thing to you is now that edge of the cube, and you can now see two sets of receding lines, it's 2 point perspective. That's the only difference. It just has to do with how the object is facing you. 3 point perspective is definitely the hardest, but the one big difference has completely to do with where you are looking. If your head is tilted up or down in any way, if your line of sight is up or down, then your form will be in 3 point perspective. And that's because your head is tilted. The height of your cube is no longer parallel to you. The length, width, and height are all receding now. And that means the closest thing to you is now that very corner of the cube. Every single other side is receding away. I know this is a lot to absorb, but don't worry about it all yet. We will go into each of these a whole lot more depth later. First, we're going to start with the easiest form of perspective, 1 point perspective, where there is only one vanishing point to worry about.